Welcome back to The Matrix. Things got kinda crazy out there, and though I may not be in the mood or the market for fun facts, but I definitely do have, facts. 3 Doctor Who facts, plugged straight from The Matrix, or whatever this bit was. Let's just start. Outside the government, beyond the police. Torchwood 3 were good eggs. It doesn't take much to be beyond the police, but the fact that their final enemy turned out to be Home Office is bellissimo. As you could probably guess from the book's title, Slow Decay is not a very jolly read. Grim, morbid, violent, and yet, the story can still take a break from the grotesque body horror to discuss the important things, like the works of Hanna-Barbera. Actually, Toshiko felt constrained to say, the ghouls and ghosts and monsters in Scooby-Doo always turned out to be men in masks, usually the caretaker. Yeah, which only goes to prove that you're not a true Scooby-Doo fan, Owen said. He was still watching the patch of darkness as it hugged the corrugated metal side of the warehouse. The 6th incarnation of Scooby-Doo, dating to the early 1980s, had Scooby and Shaggy meeting up with real ghosts, vampires, and all kinds of shit. Didn't you ever see the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo? Or Scooby-Doo meets the Boo Brothers? Sadly, no. Fun though this is, Jack interrupted. I think we have a more pressing concern right now. Although I did think that Scooby-Doo and Reluctant Werewolf marked an absolute low in the output of Hanna-Barbera Studios. Now that's dialogue, baby. There are many references to the Scooby-Doo series in all of the Doctor Who universe.
Oh, it's freaky Scooby-Doo house.
You live in Scooby-Doo's house.
But whereas modern Doctor Who is more dismissive of a zany 70s TV show for children, the ultra-gritty adult show Torchwood can't get enough of it. Which is strange, as the other spin-off does have a bunch of meddling kids. And a dumb dog. Don't get me wrong, it fills me with absolute joy to hear cynical, sardonic bastard Owen Harper being a massive adjudicator, a gatekeeper of the Scooby-Doo canon. Who knew that Torchwood 3 also sided as Cardiff's local Scooby-Doo fan club? Now, this is a cute passage, but it becomes a bit more substantial when we see other writers of their own volition also making Scooby-Doo comparisons. In Trace Memory, a different novel by a different writer, Tosh and Owen discuss what Scooby-Doo characters they would be. What are the chances of this? There's also John Hart in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and the Sins of Captain John, who says, your Torchwood is like Scooby-Doo but without the dog. Are you telling me the intergalactic bad boy from the future is a Scooby-Doo fan? In the TV episode Meet, Rhys Williams comes up with a brilliant plan of everyone hiding in his van, which Gwen dismisses as being a bit Scooby-Doo. Yeah, last time I checked, Scooby-Doo had a 100% track record. Scooby gets his guy. So...
I thought I was broadcasting to the security services. What do I get? Scooby-Doo and his gang. They even got the van.
Clearly, this derogatory use that I will not stand for persists until the far future. Scooby-Doo is a joke to Doctor Who, clearly. It makes sense for Captain Jack Harkness to have a vested academic interest in the lore of Scooby-Doo, but Owen? Yanto? What I get from this fact, and the fact that it keeps popping up, is that this is a show very insecure about being compared to Scooby-Doo. Because there's a gang and sometimes they split up. I don't remember the Scooby gang having guns. Or dying horribly. Honestly, I'm more so annoyed that the Doctor Who universe has never crossed over with Scooby-Doo yet. He's crossed over with everybody in his 50 years. The band Kiss, Batman, and John Cena. Hell, there are some Scooby-Doo villains who could be Doctor Who monsters. If I was showrunner, I'd make the Torchwood team battle Space Kook. Doctor Who versus the Scarlet Witch. Oh, I'm getting carried away. What were we talking about? Well, that's an image that's not going to leave my brain. Who do I have to thank for this aberration? The Judas goatee was published as part of Titan Comics' The 11th Doctor range. Oh, goddammit. You see, Titan Comics, they're really very good. All of their lines feature great writing, for the most part great art, and a healthy dose of fan service. Sometimes they overindulge in that fan service to the point it doesn't even make sense. The Judas goatee, great title, is a story with, Riversong, the Master, Sontarans, Absalom Dag, and the War Doctor. And because so little of it is even relevant to this story, it does feel like you just threw things at the page for nerd brownie points. And in this one, Sontarans with master goatees. You went too far. Science has gone too far. Look like potatoes, think like potatoes, mash like potatoes. Almost without any lead, just seeing the goatees, the Doctor comes to the conclusion immediately that the Master must have rocked up, introduced himself as a messiah, and seduced the troops with the apostasy of the goatee. Wow, you got that all from a goatee? The Sontarans suddenly having goatees is also part of a, get this, mysterious ancient time-locked atrocity. And you know, silly visual gimmick aside, great, an 11th Doctor story with Sontarans and the Delgado Master. But before you've got your footing, the Doctor's already off onto the next reference. And suddenly we're at Shada. It's like, what? Why? At their worst, Titan Comics' stories can sometimes feel like a tour of one reference to the next. Just a complete roller coaster of past victories, with very little narrative tissue holding the fan wank together. Oh look, it's the 4th Doctor and Romana. We have to find the Master's TARDIS. Sontarans? What wasn't this story about Sontarans? But no, 3 panels later and we're on to something else. It's not the first time that the Master has controlled Sontarans. In Destiny of the Doctors, he sends one down a corridor to have a sword fight with you. And that's a personal highlight. Eventually the arc falls apart with unanswered questions and chronological dissatisfaction as to where did the story begin or end. So it's an 11th Doctor arc, is what I'm saying. It did start a chain of events that leads to us at David Bowie's funeral, where Nigel Farage and big Boris Johnson are talking about Brexit. Well, Brexit means Brexit. I think we can all agree on that. Political commentary! One day I would love to return to the goatee Sontarans, mostly because I don't know why you introduced them in the first place. What, Titan Comics, was it just a power thing? Did you do it just because you could? No, a story should absolutely return to this colony world so we can blow them all up. And last of all, this past week Rusty Davis and the rest of Twitter watched along with New Earth. A new Earth and a new Doctor. But maybe the 10th Doctor was not as new as you thought. That's right, New Earth was not that early into the 10th Doctor's tenure. There were in fact weeks, months, and even a couple adventures before Ten and Rose take off from the Power State and head off to New Adventures in Series 2. The big gap in between these two stories is actually backed up by every medium, including the TV stuff. Love and Monsters told us that he went to celebrate with the Tylers in Trafalgar Square. It also shows us a glimpse of a lone Ten on his own Earth-based adventures trying to save Elton's mother from an elemental shade. There's Attack of the Grask, which is questionable. It could be in between Tooth and Claw and School Reunion, but then he says, "Merry Christmas," and that just confuses me further. Comics give the Doctor and Rose a lot more to do, with maybe their first adventure in the TARDIS being the betrothal of Sontar. Great comic. In this story, he's still very clearly getting used to his own body. Doctor Who Adventures had a couple of stories that only could have existed in this bubble of time. But most interestingly is Doctor Who Magazine's The Lodger. Yes, that Lodger. Before The Lodger was an unfunny and low-budget James Corden comedy, it actually starred the 10th Doctor and Mickey. When the Doctor accidentally jumps a time track, he is left stranded in modern-day London and becomes roommates with Mickey Smith, who still kind of hates him. I really like this original story. It's a great prelude to Series 2 and reminds you where Mickey's head is at. So that's a whole other week before the events of New Earth. You could also make a case for these stories, but I won't. Some people take the timeline ordering very seriously. The very fact that the domesticated 10th Doctor settled down very briefly is pretty in line with the character arc. And although he's definitely not the only Doctor to have done this, I find it really cool that there's just gaps in the continuity. They're all over the place, and that's exciting to me. And whilst the story may not have James Corden or transphobic jokes about political correctness, you're dropping the ball, Roberts. What it does have is 10 in a pub. 10 in a pub! I miss pubs.